What's going on, people? Why is my microphone stand blocking me? There we go. That's a little better. Welcome back. I don't know why my camera is not using the right camera, so I look like garbage. But that's all right. So you're not here to see me. You're here to learn about tanning stuff. So thanks you guys for tuning in. I apologize if I seem like a little bit of a mess. I literally walked in like 3 minutes ago, shuffled some tuna in my face, and then had a spoonful of almond butter. So that's my dinner. Hopefully you guys are doing better. So if you guys have watched a few of these in the past, you kind of know what the deal is. We bring on folks to talk about stuff that I can't talk about, and our guest tonight is someone that we've had before, and I will let her introduce herself. So come join us.
Hi.
How's it
My
going?
name's Willa. I'm Scratchety Rocket on Instagram and TikTok, and I tend to post things about hide tanning and foraging and basket making and all of your animism related needs.
Awesome. So today we're talking about leather tanning.
I'm gonna make myself sideways because you just made
All
to
right.
whoop. Up. Uh,
I don't know if I
okay.
can rotate you.
I don't think that.
It's just the
Um.
gift of the phone.
Hmm?
It's just the gift of the phone.
The gift of the phone.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah,
So
I
go ahead.
brought a lot of examples, so I hope people will be able to see. But it's okay if not.
I will
Um,
make you bigger.
okay.
That's the opposite. There we go.
Okay, cool. Um, yeah, so one of the things I've realized as I've been like hearing a lot of people ask me questions about hides and hide tanning and teaching people about hides and hide tanning is that most people don't have a lot of familiarity with the material itself. Like there's this concept of like leather, um, but there's like a lot of different kinds of leather. Um, you know, I mean, for one, there's a lot of different kinds of animals, and each type of animal and each individual animal has a unique hide. And then there are a lot of different tanning methods. And so when you combine all those things, there's just like infinite kinds of leather in
Sure.
this world.
Yeah.
Um,
So tell us a little bit about like what you want to work with or what you want to talk about today.
I definitely want to go over just kind of what what the different kinds of leather are and um, what they're good for.
Sure.
And hopefully kind of at least walk through what it's like to do the methods that I'm familiar with. Um, but hide tanning is not something that can be learned in an hour. So, um,
Sure. I think for most folks listening, their thought is along, okay, so I want to know what the fundamentals are so that way I know what to look for in terms of learning stuff. Because for a lot of the practices we've talked about in this Skillshare series has been really around like I don't even know what I don't know. And you've already brought this up with this concept of like what kind of skins are you using and how that impacts like what you might use that thing for. So I think that's actually a really great place to start is to bring up like, okay, this is what's available. Assuming most people watching this are in North America, these are the things you see. These are what they're used for, and kind of what the general process might look like.
cool. Yeah, that sounds really good. Yeah, I mean, there's a huge difference between tanning a cowhide, tanning a deer hide, and tanning a squirrel hide, for sure. Um, yeah. So I'm gonna touch upon tanning methods really quickly. In this, like in what I talk about in general, I'm only talking about brain tanning slash fat tanning methods. and vegetable tanning slash bark tanning methods. There's other methods, alum tanning, which I don't know anything about. A lot of the time when like modern hunters and stuff talk about tanning, they're talking about using something the orange bottle, which I think is called like Riddles or something, and that's a form of chemical tanning. I know nothing about that. Um, there's other kinds of chemical tanning. There's chromium. I think people don't do that anymore, but I don't know anything about those things. Some people, when they're talking about tanning, are referring exclusively to those like modern chemical methods. When I'm talking about tanning, I'm referring exclusively to brain tanning and vegetable tanning.
Got to use those brains.
Yeah, you gotta use your but also brain brain tanning, you don't have to use brain when you're brain tanning. We'll get into it. But yeah, and then there's a lot of, there's different animals. You've got your squirrels, you've got your rabbits, you've got your raccoons. And you just kind of continue stepping up in the the main factor is like size and thickness. Like, you can have a raccoon hide that's almost as large as a beaver hide, but the beaver hide is going to be much thicker because beaver skins are really thick. And yeah, even between gender in a species, like a hide from a female deer, a doe, will be generally thinner than hides from like an equal age male deer. But like a younger deer will generally have thinner hides than an older deer. And I feel like that's pretty universal among hides. Um, at least with mammals, females have thinner skins, younger ones have thinner skins, older animals and males have thicker skins. So if you get like a big old male hide animal and you take their hide, that's going to be like the thickest that species has to offer.
That makes
And
sense.
yeah, and so when you get into thicker hides, the thicker the hide is, the more it's kind of, I consider it like a utility hide. And thinner hides, like the thinner the hide is, the closer that you want it to your own skin, like the more comfortable it is to wear as a garment.
So we're talking about like squirrel socks, right?
We're definitely talking about squirrel socks, where you put two squirrels back to back and just put your. So interesting because they are um, really tough. They're like,
Like
uh,
tough. Oh, okay.
yeah, like for their thickness, they're just like a really resilient hide. They have a tight fiber structure. Um, Whereas like elk are known for having like very like thick skins but a loose fiber structure, so they don't make good shoes. Um, yeah, but squirrel's too thin for shoes, but moose are known to be like the best for a good shoe sole.
Okay,
Uh,
so I want to ask around this idea. So it's not like inherent in like the animal's size, what like its softness or its utility. It's actually a little bit more complicated, and it's kind of like a starting point is being like, okay, it's this size, so it has this thickness, and therefore I can start thinking about within the scope of this thickness. I can start thinking about how like what end of the spectrum within this thickness that it would be best for. And also, before I stop talking, I've been hitting the mute button so that my echo isn't heard. So just give me like a second after I'm done talking so I can fully get that out. So
cool. Yes. Yeah,
technology.
absolutely. Oh, no problem. um, yeah, I mean, you can have like this is a large gray squirrel, and this is like an average sized rabbit, and these are both vegetable tanned, but like the rabbit is much thinner than the squirrel, thinner and more flexible. And some of that, like, you can have a thick hide that's still really supple and flexible if you work it a lot. Just because it's thick doesn't mean it's going to be stiff. But for some situations, you want a stiff hide, like for making knife sheaths or anything where you're kind of like wet shaping the leather. You don't want it to be super soft and supple because you want it to just be kind of rigid and hold its shape. So a lot of people when they have a skin, they say like, "Oh, I have this skin and I want to make this thing." But you kind of just have to tan the leather and see what it's well suited for. Also, there's a rabbit in here and I'm gonna let her out. Hold on a sec.
Sure.
Hey.
I'm assuming that rabbit is not meant for a future leather project. So, folks that are watching and learning along with me, if anyone has any particular questions or thoughts, or if any experience working with leather, definitely would like to see it in the chat so we can, you know, pick someone's brain, not for the use of tanning leather, but just pick it for being curious, and maybe we can learn something new together.
Yeah, we're not gonna use anybody's brain for tanning tonight, I promise. And then there's also the question of whether you want the hair on or the hair off. Like, both of these are squirrels, and this one's actually not finished. That's why it's like you can hear it. If you can hear the leather, it's not done. It's not softened. But let's see. Get myself. This one has the hair and nice and soft. So yeah, do you want the hair on? Do you want the hair off? And then for if you do take the hair off, then there's another level of, do you want the grain on or do you want the grain off? There's my grain on hide. Like, these hides were both tanned with they were both brain tanned, and they're both deer, and they're of similar thickness, but I didn't scrape the grain off of this one, and I did scrape the grain off of this one. So this one has more of a like very smooth, especially toward like the neck, like very smooth, kind of shiny layer on the outside.
So, what exactly is the grain when you say like what you're saying exactly?
It's the very outermost layer of the skin. So there's when you think about leather, like if you think about like a leather jacket, it's shiny. But then when you think about suede leather, it's like matte. It's like very soft. And the difference between those two is that the shiny leather has the grain and the suede leather doesn't. It's the outermost layer of the skin. And so you can scrape that off to remove it, or you can leave it on.
Cool. All right. So I want to ask around this idea of like tanning leather or a hide. What exactly is the actual tanning process? Like what are we doing, like chemically speaking, or like even like not even having to go into the chemical component of it, but more just like this is basically what we're trying to accomplish.
Yeah, there's two major components to it, really. Um, because typically when you're tanning hide, you're softening the hide, and that requires a softening agent and mechanical work. And you're also tanning the hide, which requires tanning agent, namely tannins, which when you're vegetable tanning, bark tanning, come from the plants, the plant tannins. And when you're brain tanning, the brain is actually a softening agent, and you can use other things as a softening agent. Like you can use eggs, yolks, You can use a combination of soap and oil. I know some people use soy lecithin. I don't know anything about that. Um, but yeah, uh, that's the softening agent. The tanning agent in brain tanning is the smoke. So once you've brain tanned a hide, you can use typically smoke the hide, which like if you don't smoke the hide, it's just much more vulnerable to insects, rodents, water damage like mold, mildew. The smoke is preservative and protective. It's the smoke has I don't know if the smoke has tannins in it, but like maybe, but it also has like aldehyde and formaldehyde, which can be carcinogenic, especially in the like because when you're smoking a hide, it's a lot of smoke that you're trapping in those fibers. And so typically I advise that if you're going to like wear a hide after it's smoked, you want to actually rinse it so that you get all of the like excess out.
All I hear is that like we're basically like an IKEA furniture set that if you disassemble and then reassemble in a different way, all the parts can go back together, but they create something completely different. Like you're taking your brain out, you're putting it back on your skin, and then you're taking parts of it and smoking it, and like somehow it's made a different thing. It's not a human anymore, but it's still like this really cool thing.
Well, I don't know about humans. I have no experience with working with human skins, and it hasn't called to me yet. But
Yes.
perhaps we are um, IKEA worthy. Yeah, and part of that process too, particularly with brain tanning, is like preparing the skin so that it's able to like absorb the softening agent. Um, so a big part of that like is removing the membrane. So we've talked about the grain, which is like the outermost layer of the skin, but on the inside of the skin, when you have you have your like fresh hide, you've just skinned an animal or somebody else skinned an animal and gave you this hide. You typically have this like very wet, not very appealing, but super flexible skin that has some like meat and fat on the flesh side. And the first step is always to get that in a frame or put that on a beam and scrape away the fat and the flesh because we don't want that. That's not part of the finished product and not product, but project. And that's going to be the first thing to initiate rot is like excess fat and meat on the skin. So that needs to be scraped away. But once that's scraped, you still have the connective tissue that connects the skin that had connected the skin to the body. And like while you're skinning, when you're pulling the hide away from the body, you see that connective tissue. It looks like translucent webbing. Um, but that's still on the hide, and that is going to prevent your softening agent from being absorbed if it's still there. So removing the membrane is really important. And a lot of the time when I'm talking to someone who's a beginner and they're struggling with their hide, um, it's because the membrane hasn't been removed either at all or enough.
Okay. So so when we go to hang it, is there anything like special about the way it's hung? Like, does it need to be under pressure when it's hanging to be scraped? Like, I feel like when I see people working with hides, they're stretched out, and I'm not sure if that's because it like helps to be able to fully scrape things out, or if it needs that pressure, or if it's just like I don't know, a way to keep it from like shrinking and being a weird shape or anything like that.
Yeah, I mean, well, there's wet scraping and there's dry scraping, and depending on what kind of climate you live in, you want to do one or the other. I always dry scrape, and I'm usually using a beam. Um, at least like for my furs, I do stretch them out for part of the process, but so like when I'm fleshing a hide, I just have this like log essentially, that I drape the hide over the log, and then I pin the hide between myself and the log, and then I use this kind of draw knife type tool, but it's much duller than a draw knife, to push whatever I'm scraping off of the hide off of it, the flesh and the fat, and then if I'm removing the grain, I'm pushing the grain off. But you can also do that by having an appropriately sized frame for your hide. So if you're working with, a small fur, it's gonna be like that. But if you're working with a deer or something larger, it's gonna be really big. And yeah, you string it up like it's a drum head, and you don't want it to be like super tight. Like you don't want to put tons of pressure on it, because I mean you'll break your cordage or you'll rip the hide, but you want it to be like nice and taut. And the main reason for that is just that so that the hide is flat, because as you're scraping off the membrane or as you're scraping off the grain, if it's not flat, there's going to be little crevices that you can't reach with your tools. It's just you can't scrape it like that. And so when I work furs, I also, once I've scraped off the meat and the fat, I then like pin that hide to a board, but you could also easily just string it up in a frame and let it dry flat. And then I can remove the membrane. And letting that fur dry also helps the hair to stay. If the hide stays wet for too long, the longer the hide is wet, the more likely the hair is it's as rot starts, the hair begins to slip out. I never tan deer with the hair on, and I don't recommend it because deer hairs are hollow and brittle, and they shed a lot and they make an enormous mess. It's not really something I would recommend for a garment or even something you have in your house. I use them for outdoor stuff. But yeah, drying the fur is really important for keeping the hair in the hide. And yeah, it being flat is also crucial, because once there's little crevices, it's really hard to work, and bugs really like to get in those little crevices. Like that's the first place. If you have an unsmoked or otherwise untanned hides, that's the first place they're gonna go, is in those little folds and crevices.
So someone asked about the actual attachment process of a hide to the frame. So how would you do that in turn? Like, do you have to like cut holes in or anything like that?
I use my knife or an awl to poke little holes all the way around the edge, and then I take strong cordage, but strong but thin and smooth, and I go through the hole, and then I wrap it around the frame, and then I go through the next hole and I wrap it around the frame, and I go through the next hole and I wrap it around the frame. And I do that loosely at first, and then I go around again the whole thing and tighten it up. And it's important so that it's like even and symmetrical in the frame, to start by doing it loose and then go back around and tighten it up.
Awesome. So I'm going to ask another question, and I'm going to read. I guess I'll read them because we've started putting the audio tracks up on its own podcast. So if people don't want to watch but they want to listen, so for those folks, someone else asked, "Can you rework a hide if you decide to tan it further? Like if you decide afterward to take off the hair or want to scrape the grain? For example, I scraped and salted a squirrel hide last year, but I want to slip the hair off and make it more supple. Can I soak it and get back into it?"
Yeah, if you just scraped and salted the hide, you would totally be able to slip the hair off, because a salted hide isn't tanned. Salt is like a preservative, but it doesn't actually really change very much, like chemically. There's no tannins in salt that are like bonding to the fibers. There's no softening agent in the salt. It just prevents rot. Um, and it's like hydrophilic, but it's also hydrophobic. Like it can help draw the moisture out of the hide. But then if you have a salted hide that's sitting around, sometimes they just like soak in moisture from the air if it's humid. But that's not a problem because it's salted and it's not going to make it rot. But yeah, you can totally You can totally take a salted hide, and you have to rinse the salt out, and then you'll be able to do whatever tanning steps you want to do next. Um, that said, also, like, a lot of people have this attitude with hides, like, once you're softening the hide, like, you have to soften it all the way that first time. Like, once it's softened, if you try to soften it again, you're starting all over again. And I strongly disagree with that. And through my experience with tanning, I've found softening to be a cumulative effort. And um, I've tanned like, I don't know, like 10 or so raccoons for this like long vest project that has been happening over the course of forming over the course of years. And raccoons are thick, like in for a fur of their size, they're really thick, especially their necks, and their spine as well is pretty thick. And I always soften them more than once. And like the first softening is almost just to like open up the fibers so that they can really absorb the softening agent, which sometimes I use brain, but for most of the raccoons I've done, I'm using egg because their skull got smashed when they got hit by a car. So the brain's not really available. Um, but yeah, that first softening is just opening up the fibers so that they can then absorb the softening agent. Because the softening agent has to, like, the hide itself, like underneath that grain layer, the hide itself is just made out of fibers. But it's not like a knit pattern or a woven pattern like our clothing. It's like a hodgepodge pattern that goes in all different directions. It's like a total just matrix of fibers, and they're held together by like a kind of gluey substance. And so, yeah, a big part of tanning is just breaking down or otherwise removing that gluey substance that's holding them together. And in vegetable tanning, I think that kind of happens as the hide is sitting in the tannins. But in brain tanning, a lot of that's happening as you're um, scraping the hide and kind of like squeegeeing all the like juices out. Um, and yeah, a lot of the time, typically even when you're in the softening stage of like a deer hide, there's this point where like a crust develops on the outside, and then I'm always I use something abrasive to break up that crust, and then it needs to be dressed again because it's only then really going to be able to take in that dressing. And that's the thing is like I think people don't understand that it's you can't just put the hide in the brain or you can't just smear the brain on the hide. Like it needs to penetrate the hide, and um, that takes a lot of doing to actually make the hide like ready for that.
So when we talk about this idea of like softening the hide, there's a bunch of different softening agents. You brought this up. Um, is the process the same if you're using the same different softening agents, or does it change? It sounds like it changes a little bit based on what you're doing. I don't know if you could speak a little bit about that.
Um, Yeah, I mean, when I'm doing brain tanning, I use brain and egg like the exact same way. I've never tanned with soap and oil myself, but I have been around other people who do it, and it seems like it's the exact same as using brain or egg. It's just, you have to know the ratio of soap and oil that you're using. I even know some folks who will like combine things, or like when I'm using brain or when I'm using egg, I usually have a touch of oil in there as well. And I know some people have a little bit of soap in their brain or egg solution. Um, I've come to really appreciate and enjoy soap, particularly for brain tanning. I think it helps to kind of clear the fibers of the mucuses that glue them together and create space for the brain to really uh, coat the skin fibers.
And someone also asked if lye is also a softening agent.
Okay, so lye kind of functions similarly to soap in the sense that a lot of people use lye or lime or other kinds of like alkaline solutions early on in after they've removed the flesh and the fat from the hide, then they put that hide in an alkaline solution. And what that does is it swells, the whole hide swells up and the pH changes, it becomes more alkaline. And you can kind of see the grain better and where the grain is at. And at a certain point, the hair will slip away. And it's really cool because when it's properly alkalized, you could just like wipe the hair away with like no effort. It's pretty cool. And as you're scraping a hide that's been so typically you'll soak it until the hair is slipping, and then you'll put that hide on the beam if you want to remove the grain, and then scrape the grain off. And then you need to rinse out that alkaline solution, or otherwise return the hide to a neutral pH. Um, and I avoid alkaline solutions because A, it really makes my skin feel weird, and it's hard not to get it on your skin. Um, B, I've had times where it's really hard to get the hide back to a neutral pH, surprisingly. And yeah, I've found it to be really finicky, and I've found that alkalizing the hide doesn't really make it easier to scrape for me because I like to work with hides that are really fresh. And I find that when they're really fresh, it's easy to scrape away the grain. If I want to leave the grain on, I sometimes will just kind of rot the hide until the hair does that same. The hair just slips off with no effort. And then I'm going to like immediately put that into a strong tannin solution so that the the strong tannin solution will eliminate any bacteria, like cease rot immediately.
Okay. Uh, so I'm gonna ask about so how many times would we do this process, like go through the softening process typically? Let's start there.
Um, until the hide is as soft as you want it to be. So it's really kind of it depends on what you're going for. And depending on how much preparation you've done and how much like muscle you've put into the softening process, like you can have a deer hide that's like as soft as you want it the first time you soften it. Um, like I definitely a lot of deer that I've done have been like, yes, that's perfect. But I recently tanned a deer where I was just like, it's fine, but I would really like it to be softer, so I'm going to soften this again. But how soft your hide comes out is really affected by like how many times you are putting the hide in the dressing and then wringing the dressing out, or otherwise like removing the dressing by like squeegeeing it out or something and then putting it back in the dressing. Um, yeah, and I'm less familiar with like tanning in a frame. I do most of my tanning by hand, and I'd like to do more tanning in a frame, but I don't know if I think that when you're tanning in a frame, it's the same that you don't actually put the hide, or when you're softening in a frame, you don't put the hide in the frame until you have dressed it as much as you want it to be dressed.
Okay. What would be the benefit of that?
So, what was putting it in the frame?
Yeah.
So when you have the hide not in the frame and you're in the softening stage, like the hide has been dressed and now you're just working it because you need to keep the hide moving as it's drying with the dressing like in the fibers, and you're kind of breaking up the fibers and that they've been like lubricated by your softening agent. Um, Sorry, there's just like a cute little bunny here, and I really want the world to know. She didn't want to leave earlier. I tried to make her leave, but she couldn't leave. Um,
Bunnies.
it's so cute. So, okay, what was I saying though?
Hanging them for softening.
Yeah, so softening a hide by hand there's advantages to it because you can more easily like move it into the sun if you want like it to be warmer and drier so the hide dries faster, and move into the shade if it's drying a little too fast. And because you have to keep up with it, if your hide dries too fast, it can stiffen up in areas that you weren't able to work it as it was drying. Um, and you can also, if it's getting a little stiff, you can rehydrate it with some water or some dressing and keep going. Um, yeah, so that's a cool thing about hand softening. Also, you can, if you're really tired, you can bundle the whole hide up and then put it in a plastic bag and then put it in the freezer. That's a really nice thing about hand softening. Hand softening has a lot of advantages. You can like get a friend or a bunch of friends and like pull on the hide from different directions. Um, but if you put the hide in a frame, then you're using like a pole type of thing, and you get to like use your body and like lean into the hide to stretch it in like all of the areas, and you kind of just have to go over the whole thing over and over and over again. And they're a little bit different in quality too. Like a hand tanned hide will be a little more like springy and a little more like drapey, and a frame tanned hide will kind of have a little bit more of the shape of the frame. Like it'll just have a more like flat feeling to it, which can actually be really nice when you're like cutting out a pattern for garment making.
Or like a rug.
Um yeah, but you know, it also depends on how much you soften it. Like I ideally it I mean they're no, they're just as flexible. They're just as soft and flexible as any other hide. They just have a little bit less spring to them. Yeah, they're a little less stretchy.
Okay. Okay, so what haven't we covered about this process? So basically, at this point, it's like you get the hide, you scrape the hide, um, and then you treat the hide, you soften the hide, and then after we've softened it, like what is there anything else we have to do, or is it basically like once it's soft to the point that you like it, it's ready to go be used however you want to use it?
Yeah, and just to be clear, what we've been talking about mostly is brain tanning. This is the process of brain tanning. Vegetable tanning is really different from this. I mean, there's definitely overlapping aspects, but this is brain tanning that we're talking about. Brain tanning slash egg tanning and fat tanning. Yeah, so I once taught a bunch of teenagers and I was like, how could I get them to remember like what all the steps are? And I came up with this like stupid acronym called FGIMBUS. So you flesh the hide, you're removing the flesh and the fat, you uh, remove the grain if you're removing the grain. Um, so, you know, you have it on your beam, you flip it over, you scrape off the grain and also the hair if you're removing the grain and hair. And then you need to flip it back over and scrape the membrane off. And this is like for a deer hide. This is like brain tanned deer hide territory. This would also work really well for an antelope or like a small elk. But once you get into the territory of like big elks and moose and stuff, you want to be doing that in a frame. And I haven't ever done a hide that's that big, and don't really intend to, at least not solo. Um, yeah, likewise, cowhides are like in moose hide territory. It's a lot of work, and you need a really big frame, and it's a huge project. So, anyway, yeah, we're talking about deer hides right now. Basically, we're talking about like leather making, not fur making, or fur tanning. So, flesh, grain, membrane. Um, and then you put it in the brain or egg solution. Um, I also like in between the removing the grain and removing the membrane, I actually put the grain in a soapy bath with some like really basic locally made soap that's like super simple. And I really like wash the hide. And like if you put the hide in, I've discovered that like if you kind of cleanse the hide until you can put the hide in water and the water doesn't change color, it's usually a lot more it's going to absorb your softening agent a lot better. So as I'm membraning the hide, I'm also squeegeeing out this soapy water and like anything that maybe was in the fibers that wants to come out. And that creates space for the brain or egg solution to penetrate the skin. So yeah, once the membrane is removed, sometimes I also put in a little vinegar bath after that to acidify the hide. It's not necessary though. Um, and it shouldn't be a strong vinegar bath, and you shouldn't put it in there for too long because if it gets too acidified, that's also a problem, and you have to bring it back to a neutral pH, and that can be kind of complicated. So, I'm trying to keep it. I try to keep it simple. I try to just not have too many steps. That's why I don't do the alkaline solution. But anyway, so yeah, the membrane's been removed. You put it in your brain or egg solution, which is like a gallon of water and the brain of that animal, or an equivalent amount of brain from other animals, or like with a deer hide, like 10 or so egg yolks and a touch of oil, or like however much fat and oil. It's like I have a book that I refer to a lot, Deer Skins to Buck Skins by Matt Richards, for those kinds of like ratios of stuff. And it really, really helps if the dressing is warm, not hot. You can accidentally cook your skin and it's then useless. So you don't want your dressing to be hot, but it really helps if it's warm because again, we're trying to like penetrate the fibers. Um, so yeah, and once it's in that dressing too, you work it in the dressing. Like you don't just like, yeah, I'm gonna put the hide in the bucket and walk away for an hour or 20 minutes or overnight. Um, yeah, I put the hide in that bucket and I'm immediately like it's laundry, just washing it. Um, and it's fun. It's fun to like be involved in that process. And I've talked about this before, but like when I'm tanning, when I'm working on hides in general, I kind of um I feel like I'm like a spa attendant. Like it feels like a very like caretaking kind of situation. And if it feels like you're fighting the hide, it's probably because you are, and there's probably like an easier way to do it. But yeah, I'm really working in that brain solution. And then yeah, I'll do that for like 20 minutes. I'll leave it in there for up to an hour, but like there are people, there's kind of this notion like, oh, the longer you leave the hide in the solution, the better. And it's like, no, it's only going to absorb what it's going to absorb. And when the hide's really well prepared, I've seen a hide get put into um an egg solution, so it was like a gallon of water and 10 egg yolks, and it's like yellow, it's like this yellow like milkshake kind of weird like viscous water. But then we put in the hide turned yellow, like the yellow of the egg yolks, and the what was left was like gray water. Like the hide completely absorbed the eggs. And that's what you want. The dressing should look different after the hide's been in it, and that shows that the hide is absorbing it. Um, and so then you wring that out. You wring out all the dressing as much as possible, and so like typically you kind of like you have this beam and you drape the hide over the beam, and then you make like a donut and you like fold it up so that the hide is just this like folded up tube, and then you put a stick through that and you twist it to try to get out as much moisture as possible. And squeezing out the moisture is also helping it penetrate all the fibers of the hide, especially in the thick places like the neck and the spine and the rumps, those are the thickest parts of the hide, and those are the parts of the hide where it's most difficult to get the dressing to penetrate. And then you put it back in the dressing, do the same thing, ring it again, back in the dressing, ring it again. I try to dress my hides at least like 3 times.
Awesome. So, it sounds like it's a lot of work, and I don't doubt that at all. Um, so after you've dressed it a few times, is there any other things that we have to do, or is it basically like you finally can just let it dry out and then use it for whatever you want to use it for?
Um, so after I have dressed the hide a few times, I usually freeze the hide because I need a break. And some people say that freezing the hide helps the dressing penetrate, and so if that's the case, then that's a bonus. But I like tanning in the winter because I can just leave a hide outside and it will freeze. When I have access to a freezer, I'm not ashamed of using it. The first time I tanned a hide, I woke up the next day, and like the first time I softened a hide, I woke up the next day and I couldn't straighten my fingers. I just don't want to live that life. So um, I'm an advocate for freezing the hide when you need a break. Um, but yeah, so once the hide has been totally dressed, at that point, you're softening the hide. And that is the most physically active and most physically demanding part of the process. And that's when it's nice to have some friends around. So you're pulling on the hide, you're moving it in all directions, you want to abrade it so that a crust doesn't develop. And also, usually, once I get to that point where I've abraded the crust off, I will put it back in the dressing and then ring it again and then start that softening process again because it'll absorb the dressing even more once that crust is gone. I found that like that's the difference between like, oh yeah, this is a good hide, this is soft, and like this hide is like butter. Um, yeah, and there's a lot of different like tools you can use. Like you can have like a pointed stake that you're like uh stretching the hide over and like using it to kind of break. And there's also like a cable that you can use like to soften the hide. And I use those kinds of things the most for like deer, but I even use those kinds of tools for like softening raccoons. I really like having something like something with a small surface area edge, ideally something that's abrasive that I can just like work the hide over.
Yeah,
And
that's something I feel like I've seen quite a bit of on the internet when you see people working with leather. It's like always like almost like a dowel or something that they'll use and just basically just like sit back and forth, rotating it back and forth.
yeah, but like some work better than others. So like it's nice if it has like I really like the ones that almost have like an axe head kind of edge to it, and especially if that edge can be abrasive, the abrasion helps so much to soften the skin.
Okay. So once we've done all of this, what's I feel like a broken record. So is there anything after this that we need to do before it's fully prepared?
Yeah, at this point, you generally are gonna smoke the hide. Um, I once had a really beautiful, super soft, small deer skin that I was so proud of, and it was so soft, and I like put it on my shelf, like folded up with some other deer skins, and I was like staying at a friend's unfinished tiny house or whatever, and like it was only there for a few days, and I took it to like look at it, and I unfolded it, and like on the back side, mice had like come and chewed little holes in the skin, and I was devastated. So smoking the hide will really help with deterring that kind of activity. It's so sad when you do all of that work for a hide and then the dog eats it, or mice chew on it, or moths or like carpet beetles. I've had carpet beetles come and they can do some damage. So one time though, they just like kind of ate the membrane off of the face of a hide, but like didn't damage the hide, and I was like, thank you.
That's
But yeah,
awesome.
so the smoke is important, I would say. Like I've had hides where um if I'm interacting with a hide a lot and it's like really in my care and in my presence, I don't feel as urgent about the smoke thing. But if I'm gonna like leave it unattended at all, like smoke is important.
Okay, so what? Hold on. What does that process actually look like? I mean, I feel like you could say like smoking something, and it's like, well, I could put it above my chimney in the middle of winter, like there's a fire going all winter. Is that good, or does it have to be a low cool smoke or a specific material that you're burning? I feel like there's a lot that could go into what that decision looks like, and um, if it adds anything particular by using different things or doing it different ways.
Yeah, so generally I know of the best thing that I've been taught to use for smoking a hide is wood, dry rotting wood. Um like when you're out in the woods, start looking at like stumps and stuff, like that wood that's just crumbling apart. Particularly when it's like not crumbling apart in little like strandy fibers, but crumbling apart in like cubes, kind of. That and I a lot of people call that punky wood. Um, but it needs to be dry. You don't want moisture in your smoke. You just want the smoke. And there's a lot of different ways to do it, but basically you need to build a fire to get a little bed of coals and then smother those coals really well with finely crumbled dry punky wood and then funnel that smoke into your hide, which you can. And one way to do that is like sew the hide up into a big sock, and then use like an old jean leg or something as a tube. Because the smoke also needs to be cold. If it's too hot, again, you're gonna cook your hide and ruin it. This is a stage where at any stage, the hide can get ruined, but this is a particularly tragic stage for the hide to get ruined. I definitely know of cases where people have a nice soft hide, they sew it up into a big sock, and then they put the tube, and then they smothered the fire, and the smoke is going up into the hide, and that's really good. But then you have to sit there and monitor it so that like if a little flame comes up, you're able to remove the whole hide right away because yeah, too many hides have been scorched by a moment of inattentiveness during that smoking process. If it's cool enough up there, if it's not like hot, yeah, you could put a hide on the top of your chimney. Um, but again, you really need to be able to like monitor it and making sure it's not getting too hot and that it's getting smoked like evenly. Like so another way to do the thing is I like to build like a dome out of like bent straight branches or like willows or something and drape the hide over the dome. But then if you don't want lines from that dome frame, you have to move the hide around constantly. Well, not constantly, but like, every 10 minutes or something. And I don't smoke my hides very thoroughly. Like the longer you smoke the hide, the darker the color will be. But they don't need to be very visibly darkened to be functionally smoked. And for the like pest deterring element, it does help to re-smoke them. Um, every year or two. My friend Lyra, who is also a hide tanner, and she has fantastic videos on YouTube about hide tanning. She has a great hide tanning 101 on her YouTube, which is Victoria Elizabeth Greba on YouTube. Um, But and that's who I got the dome. The dome, you build the dome, and then, but you also have to dig a hole. The fire needs to be like all the way down in a hole so that the heat has time to dissipate before it hits your hides. I'm sorry I didn't mention that part before, but
Sure.
why was I talking
That
about her?
so I have a question for you. You've talked about this idea of smoking it and then re-smoking it. Now, if I'm going to go smoke a hide, how long is that process typically?
Uh, I mean, it depends. It depends on the hide. It depends on like, do you have your smoking the hide infrastructure in place already, or are you building it that day? But if you're starting from like nothing, I would say uh to give it clear your whole day.
It's fair. If I'm clearing the day to smoke some hides, it's not going to be just one squirrel. It's going to have to be a few.
Yeah, totally. Totally. Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I remember when I did that dome style smoking the hide for the first time. Yeah, like the infrastructure was already in place and the fire was like going, and it took like a couple hours for it to smoke a couple of foxes.
And how do you know when it's done?
Um, I mean, you're looking for the color. You're looking for the hide to go from like this. This hide has actually been smoked a little bit to like this. Well, in terms of color, like, this hide is not very dark, but like this is smoked enough. Like this hide has gotten wet plenty of times and has dried totally fine. That's another thing that the smoke does, is it helps the hide be able to get wet and then dry without becoming stiff again.
So I think what's interesting here is that this is something that's like a ton of steps. Like it definitely requires a skill. But the fact that you alluded to a friend of yours who has a hide tanning 101 video on YouTube, it's something that people could theoretically do on their own without any specialized training or anything like that.
Yeah, I mean, both of us are somewhat self-taught, and we've both lamented about our choice choice, not so much choice, because I mean, in her case, she just like didn't even know that there were mentors available, and in my case, I don't know, I was just being stubborn or whatever. But um, I do think that if a teacher is available to you, if there's a course available to you, if you can mentor or apprentice with somebody, that is absolutely a better way to learn than trying to learn through videos and books. I think that videos and books are helpful, and I love like working with somebody who already has like some of the notions in their mind and kind of has a sense of how much that they don't know, but like they know kind of vaguely what the steps are and what some of the tools are and what some of the terms are and what we're looking for. Like that's cool. I like working with people who have like done a little bit of their homework.
Sure. That's fair. I don't blame you. I would also, it's nice to have a variety of perspectives because you can watch a video and, the thing that you're bringing up here when I ask a question, you're like, well, it's not as simple as that question alludes that it might be. And like, that's a part of everything that exists on the earth. Like nothing's ever as simple as like, well, if you follow these steps, this is where you end up because things happen. The animals you're working with may have all these different conditions that might affect how you're going to work with that material, what you want that end result to look like, what resources are available for you as you try to make this thing, and all that is going to weigh into like a very nuanced conversation about what you're going to do when you're working with this material, and that's not going to be completely covered in a video. Just like we've spent an hour now talking about this, and it's like we've barely touched the surface of it. It's just like the most fundamental of understandings of, do I want to get any further into this, or does this sound super scary and I'm just going to leave it to people that have already made that investment, which is, I guess, kind of the goal for me on this is like, people always say, "Oh, I always wanted to do this thing." And it's like, well, you need to understand what that really means before you can dive in, and that's where I think this kind of stuff is really helpful.
Yeah, I totally agree. I think that when I realized I was interested in tanning hides years ago, I did not realize it would take years for me to even feel like I had any idea what I was doing. And like even, I tanned my first deer hide on someone's homestead where like they would come by every once in a while and be like, "How's it going?" And I'd be like, "What's the next steps?" And so I had this kind of like light mentorship that was really helpful and important. Um, but even after that, like I, went to tan another deer hide and I was like, "Oh, why isn't it working as well? Like I'm running into problems that I didn't have before because every hide is different. Every setup is different. Um, and sometimes when you have somebody who's walking you through the process, you're doing steps that you're like not even aware that you're doing. And you're not going to remember them the next time that you go to tan hide again.
Yeah, yeah, that's something I see a lot with, like, working with plants. It's like, oh, you wanna transplant something. It's like, well, yeah, you take it out and put it in the spot you want. It's like, you don't think about, like, well, alright, where were the roots when you, like, pulled it out? How compacted was it? How did you handle that condition? What are the differences in soil? So how's that impacting how you're planting it? All these things that you're like, "Oh, yeah, I guess the reason why I did it that day was because of the 10-day forecast and this and that, and, I knew it was gonna rain the next day, so I did this," and, all those little things that go into your decision making that you just kind of take for granted that somebody knew was like, "Well, I don't understand why it worked for you and it didn't work for me," and you can't even really quantify it because you didn't do it with them to be like, "This is where it went wrong," and that's where really having a mentor helps.
Yeah, yeah. I think that we don't even understand what we're missing as a collective, that we don't do very much like mentoring and apprenticeships. Um, I I see that it's like the more you learn about any particular skill and the more like skills that you do, I think the more you realize like how long it takes to learn anything and how many tools you have to just do like one skill. And it makes you value and appreciate all skills more. Like I am so interested in like people who work with wild clay to make pots and stuff, and like I know I'm not ready to dive into that because I'm already overwhelmed with like the things that I do. Um, so yeah, I mean, if I could ever just like spend some money to uh do a few day workshop where somebody just like it's like, okay, we're gonna go dig the clay. Okay, let's work on it in my little workshop. Okay, let's fire it in the way that I know how, and I know that how it really works. Like I know that that would actually be an experience that would be totally worth it.
Yeah.
Likewise, like if you want to tan a deer hide and there's somebody who's offering like a week long buckskin making workshop, which almost nobody does because almost nobody can take that type of time off. Like I know lots of people who want to learn how to tan hides, but they aren't able to make that time investment. Um,
Yeah.
but it's worth it. It's really worth it to learn it from a teacher rather than trying to teach yourself. Also, somebody wrote bearskin blanket in the comments, and I think that's really cute. And I want to touch upon that. Do
Yeah,
we
yeah,
have
yeah.
time?
Go for it.
Um, the thing about bear skins is that they're really thick. And I've discovered in my hide adventures and in my like trying to, you know, only use things that I've made kind of thing, that one of the most important things for a blanket to like actually keep you warm is drape. Um like the way that the blanket is able to kind of like conform to your body, like that you can like kind of burrito yourself in it, and that like keeps you warmer. And I've definitely found that um thicker hides that haven't been softened as much like don't drape very well, and so they're actually like not a very warm and satisfying blanket. They can be nice as like an outer shell, but like if you want a really nice bearskin blanket, or honestly a really nice bearskin anything, the you have to manually thin the hide by like scraping away some of the skin from the inside. Um, which like the main way that I've seen people do that is to stretch the hide in a frame and let the hide dry, and then use a dry scraper to like shave away. And it takes a lot. It takes forever to do, and it's a lot of work. So bear skin is too thick for a good. It's not. It's not that it's too thick for a good blanket. It's too thick for a good blanket if you don't thin it. Um, yeah, but if you thin the bear skin, then you have this nice big fur that's also flexible enough to conform to your body. Like I feel like a blanket should be as flexible as a garment that you're going to wear on your skin for it to be like a really effective blanket. Unless it's just kind of a big thing that you throw on top of you over your other blanket situations to like add a little more warmth and protection, or something that you're going to sleep on top of. Like I sleep on top of like sheep hides that I just put in a frame and dried, um, because they don't have to be flexible. It's just a raw sheep hide, but I sleep on top of them because they're warm and it's soft.
I don't know.
Konbanwa? Sorry, I'm reading the comments. Konbanwa. Um, yeah, so I've never actually gotten to work with bearskin myself, but if I ever have the opportunity to, yeah. I've seen a couple of like bearskin garments, like a bearskin vest, where I'm just like, it just looks like three pieces of cardboard that you kind of like wear, like because it's so thick that there's only so soft you can get it. So thinning hides is a good thing to a good skill to have under your hide tanning belt.
Cool. So yeah, I think as far as I'm concerned, we've covered as much as I think I could possibly squeeze out of you in one live stream. If anyone else has any other questions, please drop them now. And Will, is there anything else we didn't talk about? If I know you'd mentioned you're on Instagram and TikTok, I have it linked below at Scraggedy Walket, and that's SCRAGETYWOCKET. If folks want to donate some money to you for taking the time to chat with us, they can send a couple bucks on Venmo to at Poor Proles Almanac, and we'll forward that along. Yeah, any lasting thoughts for folks that are watching?
Um, Definitely excited to answer questions if they come up. Also, we didn't really talk about vegetable tanning, but if you think it's less work, you are wrong because it involves harvesting a lot of plant matter and then drying it and then decocting it and doing like a lot of really strong tannin baths for the hide. So, yeah.
What about acorns?
Hmm?
What
What?
about acorns? Can you use those for the tannins?
Okay, so I've heard a lot of people say, "Oh yeah, you can do that," and I remember talking with one person. She said, "Yeah, I've tanned a couple of hides with acorn shells." I was like, "How'd it go?" And she said they didn't come out very well. And I know one person who I like really respect as a tanner. Like I think she's really good, and she says that she's tanned with acorn shells. But I tried boiling acorn shells, and I didn't find like when you're tanning with plant tannins, you want to taste the fresh plant matter and taste the decoction that you're making or the tea that you're making that you're going to submerge the hide in, because you're looking for astringency. Like it should, the moment that it touches your mouth, it should just be like but it needs to be really astringent. Like tannins are known for being bitter, but astringency is more so the quality that you're looking for in it, and that's the one you're going to really feel. And I found that the acorn, I boiled them for a while, I tasted it, I boiled it way down, I tasted it. It just didn't ever taste astringent to me. It didn't ever taste strongly astringent.
Okay. Someone asked if there's a specific type of hide that you would want to use for like making book covers. So if you wanted to make a sweet old book.
Yeah, I mean, I think that if you're looking for like book type leather, that's like a step down from like sheath leather. Like you want it to be um it's nice if it's like kind of flexible and soft, but you want a little bit of stiffness to it. You want it to be like medium thick. Yeah, I think that adult male deer kind of hide. And I would definitely say like vegetable tanned is kind of what the kind of leather I associate with like book covers. But I also have a little notebook with a buckskin cover, but it's very soft, it would be kind of weird for a bigger book. Yeah, I think like any kind of bigger, thicker hide that's been vegetable tanned would be really sweet for a book cover.
Awesome. So, Will, this has been fantastic. Thanks so much for coming on. For folks that enjoyed this, we actually chatted a couple weeks ago about starvation dynamics. So, if you enjoyed this and you didn't catch that one, go check out our YouTube, and you can hear some thoughts on starvation and the longstanding effects of that. So, I definitely would recommend going to listen to that. Any final thoughts? Anything else you want to add? Oh, sorry, I kicked you off.
Yeah, just that if you like want to more information about hide tanning, my friend Lyra really has put a lot on YouTube. And I recommend her channel a lot. It's Victoria Elizabeth Greba, and it's a kind of similar style to mine in that there are lots of like stories and rambles and tangents, but it's very like dense with the kind of like nuance and detail that often are lacking in the like shorter more concise videos. But if you're going to be really tanning, like you need those kinds of little nuances and details, because that's really what makes all the difference.
Yeah. So thank you so much. This has been fantastic.
Yeah, thank you so much, and thanks for
Bye.
everybody who came to watch.
Yes. Thanks, guys. This was really fun. I learned a lot. I'm sure you did as well. For folks that are tuning in and don't know much about the Poor Proles Almanac, we are a podcast that sometimes does Twitch stuff where I bring people on who know more about things than I do to tell us a little bit about how to do basic things. Again, technical skills that folks should have that I don't. So tonight was interesting. I learned a ton about leather tanning rather. And if you guys enjoy this, please subscribe on Twitch or subscribe on YouTube. The subscriptions help fund all of the resources that we use to continue making these videos. We also have an episode coming out on our podcast next week that's going to be on Adena agriculture. So if you are into that kind of stuff, you should go jump on our Patreon. We'll probably put it up there tomorrow. So you can go check out that episode. I'm super excited about it. Last week, we dropped an episode with Dr. Sophie Chow out of the University of Sydney about gastrocolonialism and the Dayak resistance for what's going on with Indigenous peoples in Indonesia. So if that's of interest to you, go check out our podcast. If you want to support it, jump on our Patreon, $2 a month. It comes out to like 7 cents a day. Any support is truly appreciated. So until next time, guys, this has been great. Have a good one.